Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Today, Nana and I will talk about our work and our artistic practice, and yeah, we're just really glad to see that you're here, and we would just like to remind you to have yourself muted throughout. The first part, we will talk a bit ourselves, but then we would like to invite you to ask questions as well, and you may do so by writing questions in the chat or unmuting yourself and speaking directly to us. And you are also more than welcome to turn on your camera or yeah, let us see who you are. But if you don't feel comfortable, you may also just leave off your camera. That's totally fine. Just know that this is being recorded, so that might change your mind. And I will just begin immediately. So we are Nanna, Hanfgarn, Jensen, and Nadja Mattioli, and we are an artistic duo, or the artistic duo behind Beyond Darkness, which was established in 2019. And Nanna is predominantly a choreographer and collaborator, and I'm predominantly working as a performance artist, dramaturg, and researcher. And we both recently graduated from the Danish National School of Performing Arts, holding now a Master of Fine Arts in Performing Arts. Yeah, and that's actually where we met. And when we began our exchange or our dialogues, we realized that we have a similar background, at least coming from the world of dance and movement. And yeah, so that's kind of where we started from. But our dialogue very quickly led us to another common interest, which was darkness, or complete darkness. And yeah, in that dialogue about darkness, we figured out a lot of commonalities, such as the interest in the senses and the sensorial experiences, and working with the imagination, and also using nature as inspiration, or working with nature and having sort of ecology in mind throughout our practice. And working together led us also to realize that we have common values, and the values that also Beyond Darkness stand for, which are curiosity, because we believe that without curiosity, you just stay in the same place, and curiosity leads us to investigate and to constantly shift our perception, and yeah, to just not think that we have figured things out, but to always keep investigating, keep striving for other knowledge or other possibilities of creating, or yeah, and so on. And another value for us is collectivity. And for us, we are two people working together collectively, but also we invite other artists, especially from different backgrounds, to collaborate with us. So we are really interested in interdisciplinary work, and the whole idea of collaboration and decentralizing, and so on. And then a last very important value for us is, and it's at the middle of everything that we do, is care. We want to not just care for ourselves, but we also do, but we want to care for our audiences, we want to care about our work, and we want to care about the world that we inhabit, and really create a practice around care, making sure that we are not exhausting ourselves, for example, unnecessarily, and yeah, just making sure that care is always present. And so with Beyond Darkness, we do different things. We have a podcast, and we have a sensorial movement practice called Matter in Motion, but we are predominantly interested in creating artistic performative works. And this has a focus or is focused around experimental and experiential work. So experience is also really at the center of what we do. An audience experience, a performer's experience, the experience throughout the process, like really focusing on that. And then, as I mentioned before, the interdisciplinary aspect and also the cross-aesthetic element. So yes, we have a movement background, but really taking in new elements and not making them accessories, but really making them a big part, or as the same sort of, giving them the same sort of importance, and then dialoguing with each other around that. And yes, so lastly, we're throughout our studies, we realized that we're interested in artistic research. So taking more time to develop our works and not only be interested in the final result, like the performance in itself, but really the whole process, and just allowing time to investigate the topics we're interested in different manners. And also behind that is the idea that we want to encourage through that a shift in perception and reality, like from preconceptions to a new sort of reality perception for ourselves, but then also in our pieces for our audiences. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So one of the main things we're going to focus our little talk today about is our latest work, SCINTILLAE, which is a live performance and it premiered in this summer. And it is of course a work by us, but it is also together with light designer Eirik Lie-Hegra, dancer and performer Cecilie Schødt-Kjær, sound artist Elisa Bosek, and the costume designer Cecilie Skov Grønbæk. And this piece is it is a live performance, but for this festival, we thought it would be super interesting of taking this piece into a complete other direction, which would be the digital direction. And we thought that this actually speaks very well into like one of our strategies, which deals with sustainability when we think about our material. So how we rework certain material and give it a new life, so that we have one creature that then births another creature and then another creature. So how we constantly rework our artistic work. But some of the concepts about SCINTILLAE, it is a solo, or you could also say that it's an ensemble work, because it is a dialogue with more artistic elements. We focus very much on sound and the space, and the costume also has very much a part in it. But in a more like traditional sense, it is a solo, since we have one dancer, one performer on stage. And we work very much in nuances of darkness. So the light design, if you experienced it live, it gave all of these gray tones where you almost couldn't see anything. And this was exactly in this point that we were working a lot. So this very, very dark space. Very different if some of you experience this digital, but this we will come back to in the end. And also in the live performance, people were wearing headphones. So we invited people, like the audience, to have headphones on when experiencing the performance, which gave a very intimate space, since it was very, very dark and very closed in. Yes. And of course, some of the key elements or key concepts of Beyond Darkness also breathes into the concepts of SCINTILLAE. And that is of course, darkness, the senses, and imagination. And especially imagination, we focused on imagining being something else or someone else. And we especially imagined having other instruments than our human instruments. So trying to think how it would be to either be a creature on this planet, how it would have to, like, for example, move with some of those instruments, or it could be imagining having something that is completely out of this world. So we were both working with something that is very real and something that is extremely imagined. And in the imagination, I think also lays some of our more a more political point in it, since we believe that in order to imagine, or in order to change something, we have to be able to imagine it first. So this is very much where we practice. So we practice imagining, seeing other worlds, imagining seeing other things, other possibilities, and it is maybe in that process that we learn to change our own habits or our own patterns of behavior. And then very closely linked to imagination is perception, which is like we focus on it actually more of a sense. So we focus on when we see something, that we focus on the act of seeing rather than what it is that we see. And then when we go into what it actually is that we see, we try not to, first of all, not to judge it. And to be in that space, we try to, at least in SCINTILLAE, to create some very ambiguous images or forms that were very, very not discernible. So you wouldn't, like, for example, we tried to go away from gender or ethnicity. So we really tried to work with the body more as more of like a form-shaped creature, rather than seeing a human being on stage. Yes. In like some of the, like how we create some of the material, but also some of the concepts, we worked with creatures and living or non-living organisms. And why we did this is that we tried to, first of all, to decentralize the performer in the piece. We'll be talking about that, especially that part later. So we were morphing different creatures, like the whole structure of the piece was like morphing from one creature into another creature, and also morphing from one landscape into another landscape. And that was both an actual physical landscape, but also an imagined landscape. And then lastly, also like one very important thing, especially also when we're going to talk more about the digitalization of the piece, is that when you are in complete darkness, you are completely submerged with all of your body. So when you experience the piece, we really try to think the audience body into the whole experience, and the whole sensorial aspect of it as well.
Yeah, and in terms of dramaturgy, one element that really drove the dramaturgy of the piece was the idea of working with cosmogony, or creation mythology. So we like, for us, we thought stories are really important. Stories, we tell them all the time as human beings. That's one thing that we really do. We tell stories, and these stories carry meaning, and they always inform something, or they explain something, and they're a way of making sense of the world for us as human beings. And in creation mythology, it's about how the human or how the world came into existence. And we thought that that was a really important story, and that there is a need, a sort of contemporary need for a new mythical story, a new creation story. And for us, we didn't want it to be a creation story about the human being, because we are working with other organisms as well, but really about, yeah, other living organisms, the world we inhabit, the universe that we are a part of, life itself, creation itself. And so actually we use the idea of cosmogony in its purest sense, let's say, and there it became all about creation, the birth of creation, or the rebirth of things. So really creating of a new, and that informed how the whole piece was structured. And yeah, this meant that every time, as Nanna mentioned, it morphed from one creature to another, or one landscape to another, one world to another. And as an audience, you were immersed into this space of the unknown, this dark space, and you were carried through language, through sound, through movement, through scintillations of light, into this space of imagination where you could co-create what was happening on stage inside your mind. Yeah, so there was also this dialogue between what we created and what you as an audience member would create, based on what it stimulated within you. And just to tell you a bit more about how we began was that, or how we like more practically worked, in the sense that Nanna and I, we come from this world of movement or physical movement, and that's where it all started. We developed this sensorial movement practice, matter in motion, and with that practice, we work a lot with the elements that are part of this piece. So for us, this really was the way to begin. This is how it all translated from a practice into or from one practice into another. But movement for us is more than one kind of movement. It's not just physical movement. Light is movement as well. And so, yeah, inviting Eirik into the space with us and working with not just complete darkness, but this idea of scintillations of light or reflections of light, and that also became the name of the piece, SCINTILLAE. And then inviting sound artist Elisa, because sound is also movement, and then how time changes in complete darkness and how time is also movement. So really making it about movement in its broadest sense rather than movement in its physical or in the bodily movement. And so inviting all these other elements, playing a big role in the development, for us meant that all of them should carry the same weight, all of them should infuse each other, and not one element was more important than the other. And therefore, we worked with the concept of artistic response, meaning that let's say text was created first, and then that became an inspiration for movement, which became an inspiration for sound, which became an inspiration back for text or movement. And constantly we worked from someone's responded work to something else, transforming or translating it into another medium, and then from there taking it again back into another space or into another body, and yeah, allowing each of the artistic collaborators to also begin the journey from their standpoint and then infuse every other element with that. And so really work in a very circular or in a very like interwoven way. And that really meant that all of the elements are very present and very much in focus throughout the entire piece and throughout the entire process. And yeah, so, but one layer that we used, I think, for all of the artistic creations or elements was what we call imagination journey, or journeying on itself, which has a sort of ritualistic aspect. So that's usually how we begin a session, not necessarily, but often, where we just enter a complete dark space, and then we just allow ourselves to exist, and then one person will sort of guide the journeying, which means that they will just kind of allow the imagination to be triggered, and from that allow the inspiration of the day or the emotions of the day to become more present into everyone who participates into their bodies, into their minds, and then be able to take it from there. And it's a really easy way for us to continue the creative process.
And 2 more points about the creation of SCINTILLAE, which is also very much connected to one of our key values, which is care, and that is what we call fermentation and weaving. And fermentation is a part of our process design, and it is basically a time where you leave the material and you let it rest, and you let it change on its own. And it's a period where we don't interfere in the material, and you let all the bacteria and the chemicals do all the things, and you trust that all of that process is doing everything on its own. And it takes a lot of courage for us to actually do that, and to lose the control of the process in that way. But of course, it's also very important that we leave the process at the right time, and that's first of all very difficult to design, and sometimes it works, sometimes it just doesn't work. But it's important that we leave the process at a place where it is alive enough to have its life on its own. And sometimes in the process, when we then come back to it, what we get is either the essence of something, or it can be something that's very close to where we left it, but just small nuances has changed, or it can have morphed into something that is completely different from where we left it. And when I talk about material, we work both with movement material, but it can also be thought material, so thoughts in between us. It can be text, texture, whatever. So material is, so everything can be fermented, I think. Yes. So this is something that's super important in our work, and also a very scary part. And maybe an example of, because it can also be maybe a little bit difficult concept too, because fermentation is like difficult to ferment something that's so abstract. So for example, with the movement material, after a big fermentation process, when we get back to it, we asked Cecilia, the dancer in our work, to do the movement material as she would remember it without actually having to think about it. And then what came out of there was something that was super different. We told her that she would be able to change, like if she shouldn't think too much about how it will be, but trust that the material that is then there, that's okay, and that's enough. And then we would work on from there. And then we have weaving also as a part of the process and the process design. And we work with weaving on two planes. So one is more of a dramaturgical plane and how we structure a material, and the other is more interdisciplinary, so how we collaborate. And the first one, so how we organize material, I think it's important first to say that we think all the artistic material that we work with as active players, so that we from the start don't think that some artistic material has more value than the other. And then in the whole process, so when we work or when we build this material, we constantly test its possibility to weave together. So when we work with weaving, we test the material's possibility to both lead, so to be in focus, but also test the material's possibility to support the other artistic material. And then yeah, so we get all of this like woven net. So instead of thinking scenes or like strings of material, we try to constantly have them all together at once. And I think that it's also through its texture that like how we get some of the, you might say, the story out of it, or the some of the concepts of the whole, some of the whole like ideas about the piece. And then the like collaboration, or the collaborational way of thinking of weaving, it's actually some of the same concepts of as when we work with material, that we as collaborators sometimes have to lead a certain process, and sometimes we need to support. And it's something that's very basic, but it's a very it's a very crucial way of how we collaborate and choose who we collaborate with. But again, not again, I didn't say it, but it's important to say that that of course Nadja and I, we frame and facilitate the process. It's us who it's us who invite people in. But first, after we've done that, we also try to let go and let other people take over. And we have trust, and we have trust in that, because we invite experts into our room, and people who don't, or people have more knowledge than what we have, and might have other ideas and other point of views than what we do. And then another way of thinking of this of weaving is that, or actually also another way of collaborating, is that of course we are inspired by other artists and other theories, and we have a whole back catalog of things that we experience, that we bring into the space, and that we together, with all of these ideas and all of this knowledge that we get from everybody, we somehow create this huge, big woven net that people can both feel safe in, but also can play around in.
Yeah. We have just a little bit more time left, and we would like to talk to you about the transformation or metamorphosis of the live SCINTILLAE version into a digital installation. And so thinking about digitalizing the piece meant that it had to change, because first of all, it happens in mostly complete darkness or very, very low amounts of light. So you can't film it, or yes, we have used an infrared camera to film our material sometimes to see what it is that we've produced, but we weren't very intrigued by those visuals to just put them online. And so we wanted to continue the creation of SCINTILLAE, but in its digital version, in its digital life. And therefore we brought in a new collaborator who is an expert in digital works, and her name is Sine Emma. She's a visual artist and director specializing in conceptual still and moving image making. And so we sort of reused the whole process we had during the live piece creation with Sine Emma, which meant that we allowed this ongoing dialogue, and her skills and her ideas to infuse ours, and vice versa. So, and then really allowing the piece to transform through its new medium, because it does change a lot going from a live to a digital, no matter how you want to do it, if you're just filming it and then presenting it, or if you're adjusting it. And so for us, that became this big question: how do we want to do that?
And there was of course some difficulties in that question, because we cannot replicate the complete experience. And that was also what Nadja said, that we were not interested in that. We tried to free ourselves from that experience and try to create a completely, not a completely other experience, but another experience. So what we worked with in the digitalization was some of the inspirations or concepts in SCINTILLAE. One was especially after images, which is in complete darkness, when your eyes have been getting used to complete darkness, that sometimes you can see flashes of light, or you start to see like hues of light, which is something that is, you can say that there's something in between actually seeing and something that is imagined, something that we were very intrigued by, especially when we experienced ourselves at the first times. So these are something that you very strongly see in some of the video works of Signe Emma. And then we also experienced something that was really wonderful about making it digital, which is we talked about all this imaginative work, and that is much easier when we work on with the film medium, because we can, it's just much easier to produce something that is completely non-human and cannot exist in this world on Earth, and that can actually happen digitally or with video, which was I think it was at least very great fun to play with. We also tried to bring in a lot of the sensorial aspect to it, so that's so some of this, like some of the actual sound that we used in the performance, that's also in the digital work, and it still has the same, it should maybe still have the same effect on the body, even though that it's not a completely immersion that we worked with in the dark, but you will get a hint of it. And also like the text that's there. And so we now have an element of reading, which we didn't have in the performance. So we also played a little bit with how the movement of the eye is working, that is somehow echoing some of the experiences that we have in the dark.
Yeah, and how the reading is also a way of stimulating the imagination, which otherwise might have been movement or some other form, like some other elements.
Yeah. But of course, there is a very big factor in SCINTILLAE. We work with a very human relation. So we work very much with the body of the audience, and we do that through the text and the visuals and the sound. But we can of course not do it as much as we do it when we are in a space together. Which was a hurdle to get over, because it's something that's very dear to us in SCINTILLAE, and what we think is so wonderful about performing arts. So yeah, just accepting that that's a different medium.
Yeah.
Yes.
And maybe that was also a part of the process, was just allowing space for the transformation, allowing space for the other to come about. To let go of the idea of replicating the experience of the life into the digital, but really freeing ourselves from that and saying it is a new piece, and therefore it can have new elements and new experiences, and becoming sort of like it emulates the fermentation process, or where something has to sort of bubble to the surface, and something has to be sort of transformed, and then it becomes its own creature, its own life. And yeah, also reflecting, like in that process, it also reflects the process of the performer, who is going constantly through a metamorphosis from one creature to another, from one landscape to another, from one world to another. It's again about the idea of creation, so keeping the cosmogony element alive as well. Here we have also new worlds, a new creation of a piece, but it's not the same, and that's good, because as Nanna mentioned before, or at least for us, we think that's great, because we want to work with this idea of a sustainable creation practice, and that also means recycling or reusing existing material, but transforming it by putting it into a new space or putting it into a new format, using new media to work with. And yeah, so giving it a new life, a new cycle, and allowing it therefore through this new medium to become its own new version, its own new self. And just the last information maybe about that is that SCINTILLAE will continue its rebirthing process, because we also want to do a site-specific version of SCINTILLAE. So it took place in a black box theater, then it was transformed, or might also continue being transformed, into a digital piece, and then it will also transform into a site-specific piece where we allow nature to be much more present, because now nature in the piece was more present on the imagined layer or in the soundscape, but it will actually be a real element, and how the experience of the audience will change by being in an outdoor space, by breathing in different air, different smells, allowing the sensorial to be even more prominent, and how that affects then all the other artistic layers that we have been working with. And just, yeah, we're very curious to see where that journey will take us.
But that was it for us. And we would be very curious to hear a bit from you. If you have any questions either about if you experienced our online work or our live work, or what you heard just now.
So again, you may unmute yourselves and just ask, or you can also write a question in the chat and we will just read it. Yeah, hi.
Hi, hi, hello, thank you for your presentation. Hi Nadja, hi Seja. It has been some time. I would like to ask you about the temporal aspects of these two performances, the live performance and the digital performance. How did you relate to the temporal? I'm saying that because I listened to the digital around 10 times. And that is probably another experience than listening once. Mm-hmm. And I think it changed the whole time also by listening and re-listening. So it's very interesting, the temporal dimension, how you, let's say, worked with this metamorphic movement from one to the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as I mentioned as well before, thank you for your question. I think that's a really interesting question. We think of movement as a bigger type of movement, like movement also being time. And in the digital, as you mentioned, you have different opportunities. You can, first of all, you don't have to follow our setup or our curation. You can decide to stick to one thing and re-listen or re-watch it several times. So you have a more active role in the experience curation, at least. And actually, we talked about having some elements that would loop constantly. So you could actually, there would not be a beginning and an end. But at this current stage, we were just unable to do that. But that was something that we had in mind because the experience of time in darkness and in SCINTILLAE was so crucial. There was this long, in the live performance, how time just slows down and you really almost lose a sense of time. And here we wanted to allow the audience or the viewer or the listener to take more sort of initiative in the experience of time or the timing of it, because also just because you finished listening to an audio file doesn't mean you're going to immediately continue scrolling down. You might just ponder for a while on what you listened before you actually continue to the next part. And so the timing is very flexible in that sense. And that's something as well that is part of this metamorphosis, is this leaving this sort of control over the timing out, and allowing therefore more audience involvement in that sense.
And in the live event, we also experienced, because it was very some experienced it very meditative, because it was very dark, and some people were actually like zoning out sometimes, not really falling asleep. If we would have extended it even more, maybe that would happen. But so that's also one of like a choice of breaking it up into these elements of like, you zoom in on one element and then you zoom back out, and then you zoom into another element, and then you get a shock at a third. And
and just because of that, like for example, the strobe moment, which also happens in the digital space, it's not exactly the same because it's not as powerful and it's probably not as surprising, but there's still an element of surprise, I would say, and the different rhythms of the soundscapes and the different rhythms in the videos. So like some being very slow and some being much faster, and also then that changes the experience of time. Even though the videos might be almost the same length, the video in itself, the experience of the video in itself might feel much quicker or much slower. Yeah.
I don't want to monopolize this,
but you may.
I have one more question, and it has to do with the physicality of the space. You discussed that in the live performance you had headsets, which is another physicality than the presence of sound in the physical space. It is, let's say, have you considered this difference of, let's say, of having another relationship to sound that is not directed so much, but it, let's say, it evolves in space?
Yeah. We did. It was a very important question right from the beginning. And Nanna was so interested in working with headphones, and I was very interested in having a sort of more open experience of the sound. And then our sound artist, Elisa, was very intrigued by the idea of working with headphones because of the ASMR experience that she could provide and the different directionality. But
we did both. Actually.
Exactly. We ended up doing both. And that's sort of like another surprise element, is that at some point, the sound travels away from the headphones into the space. And then you as an audience might not necessarily realize at first that the sound comes from the space, or you do, but the sound is muffled because you're wearing your headphones. And then you have the choice of taking off the headphones and hearing the sound all around and being like completely part of the experience. Because one thing was that the experience of the audience was rather personal and individual because of this closed in being with the sound in the dark, not knowing who is around you, with you, if you are alone, if there are other people, forgetting about it. And then the removal of the headphone and then being part of the space properly, hearing the space itself, not just the sound, but the space. So hearing also more the movement of the performer, not just sensing it because there was a brush of air, but also really hearing it. And of course, the vibrations then of the movement seem more real as well because you start to hear them. So we did include that, but only towards the end, so that there was a new element and opening up. And it really fitted also dramaturgically, because towards the end, there was a rather big change, let's say. I think we tried to echo that in the video as well, so that in the digital version, that in the end there's it has transformed quite a bit from one creature to another to something that maybe yeah, a bit more transformed.
Yeah. Great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have a question or would like to contribute something?
Hey, thank you for sharing. Hey, I would like to ask, I have just seen or experienced the digital form of the work. I haven't experienced it live yet. And I was very curious, because I can see here that you have worked also, you just started talking about the dramaturgy in terms of order of things. And I would be interested to hear a bit more about it. Like, did you try to translate the dramaturgical order of things from the performance into the digital form, or did you work with it in a different way because of us experiencing it also differently? So I'm just interested to hear, even though I haven't seen the live performance. So I would be curious to hear, how did you work with it in terms of order?
It's completely mismatched. So we rearranged it for the digital experience. So it's unless the end, it was important that there was a change in the end, but except for that, we use material for what fitted, especially with some of Sine's work of arts, and then we curated it in what fitted mostly what we think fitted the digital.
Yeah, exactly, because again, it goes back to the idea of it becoming its own piece or its own work, and trying to go through the same order, it didn't seem to make sense for us, because there were so many elements that could not be a part of the digital, and therefore the digital became, it became this other space for all of this material to exist in, but differently. And some elements are a bit similar, like in terms of order, but
yes.
Yeah, but not too many.
No.
I don't know. I think we also thought about a larger version of this, where more elements could be included, and that could potentially also mean including a whole new something completely new that didn't arise from the first, let's say, movement, like from the first piece with its movement material or sound material. Like now we reused the same movement material, but yeah, we transformed it. As you can also see, there's a lot of digital, like digitalization of it, like the whole effects that were used, but there would be a potential to create something that didn't exist beforehand. Yeah.
Great. And just a quick comment, the decentralization that you talked about before, it's actually it's coming to the audience over the digital form. I cannot really say, is it more of is it the sound more dominant, or the text, or the visuals that you created? So it's really passing to us this idea of decentralization and using the elements in an equal manner. Yeah.
That's very good to hear.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So if there are no further questions, I would say we can leave it at that. And if you do have questions, you can always contact us. Some of you have our contacts already, but if not, you can write us an email at
bd@matterinmotion. Don't know.
No. That's funny
how-
that I don't remember our email. But we have a website.
bd.matterinmotion@gmail.com.
Okay, there you go.
Maybe I'll write it in the chat.
Yes.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for joining us, and also for looking at our work and listening to us, and sharing your comments and questions. It's really important. And as we mentioned, sorry, just the last thing, as we mentioned before, this like ongoing dialogue we have with our collaborators and other artists and theorists, we really believe in this conversation with people that experience our work. So we really thank you for being here and sharing this with us. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wait, and
May I just ask one last question?
Yes, of course.
How easily transportable is your performance?
In terms of like practicality, the biggest.
Always practicality.
Yeah. No,
I'm not talking about the rhizomatic dramaturgy at the moment. Practicality.
No, the biggest or the most problematic element is to find a space that can be completely darkened. Other than that, it's actually a piece that can relatively easily adjust.
we don't need any lights. We
We
very
do,
few.
we do
Yeah,
need
but
lights.
we do, but they're very few.
Yeah.
And Nadja, you are the performer, or?
No,
No.
we have a performer who's called Cecilia. Yeah. So
Okay.
Nanna and I did not perform in the piece. Nanna performed in the trailer, but we didn't want to be physically on stage for this piece. We really wanted to step out, because working with complete darkness is so difficult to be in it and observe and having any sense of experience of what the audience might experience is already really difficult, because we get so used to the dark, and then we get used to knowing where elements appear, and being in the piece and not seeing at all what an audience might see. That was just from the beginning too difficult for us, and we just really wanted to collaborate with Cecilia. So yeah. But one performer, and then we usually want to be the two of us in the space, and then we have a light designer and a sound artist. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great.
And for those of you who are interested in the Living Manifesto Festival, which is the space that curates the experience of SCINTILLAE, the digital version for us, at 8 o'clock now, there will be a dialogue between Gru Vorhalberg and Akim Toussaint-Bach, and they will talk about making art more accessible and available. So if you have some extra free time tonight, tune in. It will be super interesting to listen to their dialogue. Yeah, thank you.